Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we are looking at Apple. And wow, you have really given us a lot to work through here. We've got financial reports, market sentiment, and even stuff from Apple's own website about that Vision Pro headset launch.
It really is fascinating. I mean, we get to peek behind the curtain at one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, it's like we've got backstage passes or something. So
Yeah.
why don't we just jump right in? Let's start with the financials. The Tip Ranks report has Apple missing EPS estimates by a pretty big margin in their last earnings report.
hmm
63 cents. I mean, you would think that investors would be freaking out, but it doesn't seem to have caused that much of a stir.
Right. And I think that's because everyone knows just how enormous Apple is. Their market cap is $3.55 trillion.
Right.
Trillion with a T. So a little bump in the road isn't going to make people forget that this is a company with a ton of resources and global reach.
I guess it's like the 800-pound gorilla in the room or something, right?
Well,
But what about the specifics of their financial performance? I've got the stock analysis report here, and it shows key figures like revenue growth, profit, and net income. Did anything stand out to you compared to how they've been doing in the past?
revenue growth has been a little bit slow recently. It's not like they're in free fall or anything. But it does make you wonder if maybe they're starting to face some headwinds. Some analysts are saying that the market is just saturated. Like, how many more iPhones can they realistically expect to sell? And then you also have to consider the competition,
Mhm.
especially in places like India and China.
So is this the beginning of the end for Apple? Or just a temporary thing? I'm looking at the Tip Ranks report, and it looks like the overall market sentiment is cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, you've got the bulls and the bears as always. The bulls are really excited about the potential in their services. Apple Music, Apple Pay, all those subscriptions, they generate a lot of recurring revenue. And they also think that there's a whole bunch of people out there who are about to upgrade their iPhones, which would give them a big bump.
It's like waiting for the next wave to come in so you can go surfing or something. But what about the bears?
Well, they're worried about the revenue growth slowing down, of course. Plus, production costs are going up. And the global economy is a little bit shaky right now. If people don't have as much money to spend, that could have a big impact on Apple. And then there's the whole regulatory landscape.
Oh, yeah. Apple has definitely caught the attention of regulators lately. Didn't they just get hit with a huge antitrust fine in Europe?
They did. And on top of that, they've got those ongoing lawsuits with Epic Games about the App Store fees. It kind of makes it seem like Apple is this big bully who is trying to crush the competition.
That's so interesting because on one hand, you've got this image of Apple as this really innovative company, sleek designs, consumer-friendly products. But then at the same time, there's this growing feeling that they're a gatekeeper, maybe even stifling competition.
And that is where things get really interesting. Because to figure out where Apple is headed, we need to look beyond just their finances. We need to consider all these other factors, like
Right.
how are they going to deal with all these regulations? Can they hold on to their closed ecosystem, or will they have to open things up?
Okay, so we've got this interesting tension between how well Apple is doing financially and the challenges they're facing from regulators and the public. But before we go any further, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, that shift towards services.
Yeah, that is a key part of figuring out what Apple's trying to do right now. It reflects how the tech industry is changing.
It makes sense that they wouldn't want to just be a hardware company anymore, right? Now they're a platform, an ecosystem, and they just keep evolving. Let's unpack that a little bit and see where they might be headed.
Okay. Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how they've shifted from devices to services. Now they're so embedded in our digital lives, and it's a smart way to bring in more money.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I know a bunch of people who can't live without their Apple Music or their Apple Watch. But it's not just individuals. Businesses and schools and stuff use their services too.
Exactly. And that's what their strategy is all about. They want to create this closed ecosystem where their devices and services all work perfectly together. It's like they're creating their own little universe that you can't escape.
Like a walled garden, but a really nice one. And from a business standpoint, it's a great idea.
Mhm.
It's much easier to predict how much money you're going to make if you have a bunch of people paying for subscriptions every month, instead of hoping that they'll buy a new iPhone every year.
Exactly. But that closed ecosystem is also why they're getting so much attention from regulators. That EU ruling that's forcing them to allow other app stores and payment methods on their iPhones, that's a big blow to their strategy.
It's like someone just punched a hole in their wall. And it's not just the EU. There are governments all over the world who are starting to get concerned about Apple's power.
And that's a big risk for Apple. If they have to start making changes to comply with all these regulations, it could really hurt their profits.
So we've got this balancing act between their financial performance, their shift towards services, and all these potential problems with regulations.
Mhm.
But what about their actual products? Apple has always been known for coming up with a really cool, cutting-edge technology. Are they still doing that?
Well, that brings us to their Vision Pro headset. That's their big push into augmented and virtual reality. It's a huge bet on the future of technology.
I've seen the demos on their website, and it looks amazing. But is it going to be as big as the iPhone? Or is it just a niche product for techies?
That's the million-dollar question. Some people think it could be the next big thing. They say it's going to change how we interact with computers and the world around us. But then there are others who are a little more skeptical. It's really expensive, and AR and VR haven't really taken off yet.
It's a bold move, for sure. It shows that they're not afraid to take risks and invest in new technology. But speaking of risks, what about their work on autonomous vehicles? That seems like a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, the Apple Car has been this big mystery for years. No one really knows what they're up to, but there have been some rumors that they're actually making progress. And if they do decide to start selling cars, it's going to be a massive undertaking. It could be incredibly successful, but it's also super risky.
It's like they're playing chess on a global scale, making all these strategic moves in all these different industries. But with all this focus on the future, are they forgetting about their bread and butter? What's happening with the iPhone these days?
Well, the iPhone is still their most important product. It brings in a huge chunk of their revenue. But even there, we're seeing some changes.
Like what?
Well, people are holding onto their phones for longer now. The upgrade cycle is getting longer, so Apple needs to come up with new ways to convince people to upgrade. Plus, they're facing more competition, especially from companies that make high-end phones.
So even their most successful product is facing some challenges. It seems like Apple has a lot to deal with. But they also have a ton of cash just sitting around. How are they using that to navigate all this?
That's a great question. And that leads us to their financial strategy, specifically their dividend policy and their share buybacks.
So they're giving some of that money back to the people who own their stock. And that's good for investors. But wouldn't it make more sense to use that money to develop new products or maybe buy some smaller companies that are doing cool stuff? Maybe they could even put more money into the Apple Car project.
It's a tough choice for any big company. They have to make their investors happy, but they also have to invest in the future.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. Make money now or invest for later. Speaking of the future, what about all that ESG stuff? The environmental, social, and governance stuff? That's becoming a big deal for a lot of investors.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And Apple has been working on that. They've set some big goals for reducing their environmental impact, like using more renewable energy and being more responsible about how they get the materials they use to make their products. They're also trying to improve diversity and inclusion at the company.
But haven't there been some issues with how workers are treated in their supply chain?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. Like a lot of tech companies, Apple relies on a bunch of different factories all over the world to make their products, and there have been some reports of bad working conditions in some of those places. It's a complicated problem, and Apple is trying to fix it, but there's always more they can do.
It shows you that even a company as big as Apple is part of this bigger system,
Yeah.
and they need to make sure that everyone in that system is treated fairly. So to wrap things up, what's the big takeaway here? What should our listeners be thinking about when it comes to Apple's future?
I think it's clear that Apple is at a crossroads. They've got a lot of challenges. Growth is slowing down in some areas, regulators are breathing down their necks, and they need to keep coming up with amazing new products to stay ahead of the game. But they also have a lot going for them. They have millions of loyal customers, a really strong brand, and a history of doing things that no one thought they could do.
It's like we're watching a play unfold. Will Apple keep its crown as the king of tech, or will they crumble under the pressure?
And that's what makes it so exciting. We don't know what's going to happen. But by looking at the data, understanding their strategy, and thinking about all the different forces that are at play, we can get a better sense of this fascinating company and how it's shaping our world.
Absolutely. This isn't just about cool gadgets and profits. It's about the future of technology, the decisions we make as consumers, and the impact that companies like Apple have on our lives. So until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and stay curious.